Boa tarde, good afternoon, que hora? First of all, I like to ask for your permission to read my speech. With my so-so spoken English, I would not like to waste the precious time given to me thinking about citable past tenses or searching for the proper connectives. You will understand me. That said, I am immensely grateful for the attention to my work, which has afforded me the opportunity to participate in this celebration, a very significant one for us who love Janet Frame and had our lives impacted by her brilliant inventiveness. Particularly, I want to thank Professor Grace Moore, Professor Linley Edmonds, for their kindness and patience. Also, my retroactive gratitude to Dr. Simone Drischel, who welcomed me and my obsession into her office 2 years ago. There are many other people I must mention. First and foremost, Anne and John Barsby and their fabulous family, Josephine Dodd, the very lovely teachers and friends from the Language Center, to whom I pay my homage through Dr. Sandra Bennett, Roberta and Amilcar Carvalho, and my young flatmates from London Street. Without all these people who cared for me, fed me, kept me warm, I would not have made it. And to Pamela Gordon for the kindness with which she heard about my project. I add to the joy of being here the honor of preceding Professor Jean Bauni, whose work reminds me of one of the major themes of reflection in my first professional incarnation. Having practiced medicine for nearly 20 years before becoming a writer, the ethical and human issues that intersect suffering with medical practice have been a recurring subject of my concerns. In my country, now under a government that, despite being Labour, is hijacked by a corrupt parliament serving the most unspeakable interests, the inequalities among the unequals deepen and deepen. The homeless, the zombie crowds of crackhead junkies, the high population in the favelas, at the mercy of organized crime and violent police, the frightening growth of rape and feminicide, racists demonstrating their criminal behavior without any trace of shame. A true catalogue of the worst that this crazy moment in the world is producing. For 4 years, we put up with our far-right clown, but one who sat in the presidential chair with a gun in each hand. And we must not forget the real chance to have these people again in charge, elected by popular vote. Embedded into this landscape is the health issue I would now like to turn back to. The medical associations felt free to work under a spirit of corporatism that flirts with backwardness, commercialism, and denialism, despite our heroic public health system that they had yet not enough time to destroy. They, altogether, government and medical associations, left 700,000 Brazilian people died in the COVID pandemic. This is how I can justify the relevance of reading Janet Frame in Brazil today. In quotes, by offering us a decidedly dystopian narrative, Frame reminds us of utopia's original meaning as the good place, utopos, that categorically does not exist, or utopos. that must not exist if it is to retain its goodness. But Frame not only take us to the limits of utopia as conventionally understood, she also challenges us to think utopia otherwise, as the signpost to a world that is not even mentioned, by evoking the good no place without betraying it. This is what Simone Rischel teaches us in her extraordinary essay, Signposts to a World That Is Not Even Mentioned. Janet Frame Ethical Transcendence, one of my guides in my hard reading of intensive care, the first one of Janet's books I was introduced to. Now I may remember how this encounter happened. It was the end of 2018 when I first arrived in Dunedin to attend the graduation of my daughter at Otago. Wandering around the city, I literally tripped over Janet's plaque at Writer's Walk and was captured by the irony of Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. The next day, I went to the library, and the first book randomly offered to me was Intensive Care. I barely knew what awaited me. My tourist plans were greatly disrupted from there. I was captivated and trapped by the book. I was having some days off the internet. The local SIM card in my mobile was not working properly. My laptop was broken, and this justifies the peculiar way of my insertion to the Frame's literature. I only learned about her biography, the tragedies, the misdiagnoses, after I had already been seduced by her fiction. It seemed so unbelievable that I had never heard about this author that I came to the conclusion that only it could be my own ignorance. I then wrote emails to two friends who are very esteemed translator of English literature to Brazilian Portuguese, and neither of them knew of had heard of her. I returned to Brazil with an extra suitcase of books purchased for hardware, including the autobiographies. As I read both the biography and fiction concurrently, still very much impacted by what I had seen in New Zealand, I began to write about it all, mixing things as they were, as they came for me. The strong impression of your culture that allowed Lottie living in poverty to provide her children with the opportunity to inhabit the world of ideas. Um, let's remember that Myrtle and Isabel were the other two juvenile Bronte sisters, with the careers interrupted, who could know about the future. And at this point, we need to consider that I was taking these data as testimonies from a historical time in a place somewhat mythical in my own imagination as a child, when the far, far away South Pacific was almost a fictional, untouched world of adventures. You see, for all these reasons, my introduction to Frame's literature was different than yours. Remember that Intensive Care was the first book I read. I didn't have the preparation to enter the harrowing unfolding of the Livingstone family with their war wounds, the first feminicidal and suicidal calling, and the second calling, the domesticated, clean handed technocrat. I knew the clever, funny, and the still almost naive Millie before I knew Daphne or Stina or Naida. Just after I had had these initial and strong impressions, I started seeing and dealing with the issue of fictionalizing real life while I was sitting beside Millie under the pear tree. We both looking at the signpost. I really didn't care about the real life of the author. Thus, in this culture, the inverted strategy was cooked. It was just a way I imagined I could use to tell the story of Janet Frame to a fresh audience. Emulating my personal process, I started an upside down text. The frame, Janet, an inverted sonata. It starts with the repercussions of that Nobel nominations, awards, and publications of the mature and celebrated author, chapter by chapter, as if a musical piece began at its climax and slowly unfolded its movements and subtleties. The main idea was this. In New Zealand, perhaps in the Anglophone world, all the stunning inventiveness of Janet Frame is perhaps overshadowed by the tragedies of her life. For me, it was different. The literature came before the author and the controversies, and I supposed that this could be reproduced. Okay, of course. Now we must remember that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Let's see, I intended to write a book that presented the work of an author to the Brazilian reader who, captivated by a biography intertwined with fiction, would end up wanting to read a book that does not exist. This was one point. The other point was in the weaving of the inverted sonata. I was intertwining those moments from the autobiography with fictional transfigurations, obviously by choosing quotations and translating them, which ended up numbering perhaps more than 100, using entire poems as epigraphs, none of them authorized. It was then that publisher Salvio Cotter from Cotter Editorial made me understand the obvious. To present a fiction writer in Brazil, we need to have works translated into Brazilian Portuguese. That's how it's done. I first hesitated because I am not myself a translator, and I was a little lazy, a little afraid, maybe a little jealous to share this process with other people. That was when I considered quitting. But, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, as the saying goes. If we need to translate, then let us have a project through which Janet Frame stands upright on the Brazilian shelf. Let the reader see altogether a sample of the work, not just one title. This wouldn't refer to her immense work. So here we are with this unveiling project. The intention is to translate the lagoon and all their stories, Owls to Cry, the pocket mirror, Mona Menino and the smell of the sun, intensive care, and the Carpathians. Of course, this sequence uninverts the sonata. I thought of doing the opposite, but I was not sure if it would not be counterproductive to propose a chronology in which language becomes in some way less complex. I am still not sure if it was the best option, putting the bottom side up again, but that's what we have since the negotiation between publishers is set, and we are authorized to translate for now the lagoon. In any case, the inverted sonata moves on, even if it can never be properly published. Perhaps at the end of the launch of the 6 titles, it may be authorized as a giveaway for the reader who has completed the collection. I don't know, I am kidding, of course. The future is in God's hands. In this case, the future is in publishers' hands. Okay, Curitiba, my hometown, is an important hub of literary translation in Brazil, linked to Universidade Federal do Paraná. If we obtain support and some visibility, we can count on the participation of some of the most significant names in translation from English to Portuguese, to Brazilian Portuguese. Originating from this collective, we have Ivan Justen Santana, Adriano Escandolara, and Guilherme Montijo Flores. The graphic design will be by Jussara Salazar, a multi-artist who will bring from the first book covers that communicate with each other, giving the idea of a collection, a cutout of the whole work. An important detail, the translators and Jussara are all award-winning poets in Brazil as well. Another novelty we are incorporating into the project is to provide the reader with a soundscape of the musical reference that punctuate Janet's work by inserting QR codes in the publication that lead to the recordings published on the internet. Well, you see, we have at this moment an idea in our heads and a team of visionaries. Some players are off the field, others on the bench. We are authorized to translate only the first book, but yes, I would like to believe that the project will move on to the other titles. This incredible opportunity of being here and of speaking to you is the most symbolic starting point I could dream of. I wish I had the courage for a live participation and a real interlocution with you, but my conversation in English, as you can imagine by my pronunciation, rehearsed pronunciation, might have made me shoot the project in the foot. Maybe if the internet connection and my awake conditions had helped, I am now somewhere around here, full of shame, watching myself by Zoom, happy to have listened to the previous presentations and eager to hear the next ones. My cowardice deprived me of exchanging ideas live, but I would greatly appreciate receiving criticisms and suggestions for my project through these channels. Once again, I am grateful to you all and to Dunedin, the city that I love and that has always treated me so well. Above all, I am grateful to Janet Frame. Let's read her for today and forever in New Zealand, in Brazil, everywhere. Let's spread the signposts, trace the borders of her utopia at the edge of all abysms around the world. And now I want to leave a sample of how a Janet's text can sound in Portuguese. A translate excerpt from the short story Miss Gibson and the Lumber Room, one of my favorites. Querida senhorita Gibson, vou lhe contar agora a verdade. Tenho 21 anos, sou independente e não tendo que escrever uma redação uma vez por semana, a glória da vegetação, o horizonte em chamas, os últimos raios do sol tocando os topos das colinas com ouro, a beleza da natureza, a brisa gentil acariciando o prado. Querida senhorita Gibson, eu era uma mentirosa horrível. É sobre o quarto de despejo. Você lembra? Foi em parte culpa sua, você sabe? Você leu para nós uma espécie de redação sobre o homem que abriu a porta do quarto de despejo e passou uma longa tarde com os tesouros do passado. Lágrimas vieram aos olhos dele, eu lembro. E as meninas mais delicadas da classe tiraram seus lencinhos quando você leu essa parte. Bem, eu fui para casa e fiz a minha redação. Nós morávamos, na época, em uma casa grande, nós tínhamos alguns criados para ajudar com o trabalho de casa, porque em uma casa grande você não consegue dar conta de tudo sozinha. E nós tínhamos uma cozinheira francesa, chamada Marie-Suzanne, que usava um penteado francês e que dizia oui, oui, madame, mais oui, e outras expressões idiomáticas. E eu não tinha uma casa com 100 quartos, e uma cozinheira francesa, e um jardineiro com barba. Eu tinha um lugar pequeno onde eu vivia. Eu tinha uma mãe que cozinhava para nós, e ela cozinhava bem também. E meu pai cavava o jardim nos fins de semana, e ele plantava amores perfeitos. E nós tínhamos gatos e cachorros e coelhos e um rato na copa. E eu gostava de estar viva. E estava me lixando para o passado, e era o presente que interessava. E, senhorita Gibson, se você quer mesmo saber, nós nunca tivemos um quarto de despejo. Muito obrigada. Thank you very, very much. Namhi.